I still remember the sunny day it was in April of 2008 that we were driving back. It was April 16th, and my wife and I, we were driving back from Costco in Kitchener-Waterloo, and at the time we were youth pastors in a city called Guelph. And when you're a youth pastor, God's gift to you is a place called Costco. And so we were at Costco and driving back from there because we didn't have one in Guelph at the time. And as we were driving back, I got a phone call. And it was a few minutes from home, so me being the responsible young adult I was, I just didn't answer it. And as I pulled into my driveway, I remember my wife Melanie going inside, and I called my voicemail. And it was my dad who left me a message, and the message was something to the tune of, "Justin, you need to call me. Something really serious has happened." And my dad didn't ever really leave those kinds of messages, and so I got that feeling in my gut that maybe you've had before. You've had that feeling like this is not going to be good. And it was right. It wasn't going to be good. And I remember walking in the house and telling Mel and sitting down on our ugly blue couch because it was all we could afford. And it's funny the details that you remember. And I called my dad and I listened. I said, "Dad, what's going on?" And he said, "Justin, I don't know how to say this, but your mom died today." And it was one of those things. She just didn't wake up that day. And so we later learned in the autopsy that, 5% of autopsies, they just don't know why. She just didn't wake up. And so it was that day and the days that followed and the weeks and the months and the years that followed that largely shaped who I am today through a process that's called grief. And so I want to talk about grief today. I want to talk about it for a couple of reasons. And the first one is that grief is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter your race, your religion. It doesn't matter how your demographic. It just matters that you're a human. And if you're a human, you will experience or likely have experienced some kind of loss. And for some of you, that might be physical loss, but others of you, that might be just the loss of a dream. It might be the loss of a relationship. Maybe for some of you, you've been through a separation or divorce and you've experienced loss plus rejection. And in some ways, it even feels worse than a loss of a loved one. Maybe for others of you, you've experienced retirement and you feel what is loss of purpose or a miscarriage, or you lost a pet, or you lost a dream, or you lost a friendship. Every single one of us is not exempt from grief. And so I want to talk about it because literally every single person, whether you're online or you're here, you know what I'm talking about. I also want to talk about it because we live in a culture that is a pain avoidance culture. And our culture says, indirectly most of the time, but it says it very loud, that pain equals bad. Pain is bad. So therefore, grief is bad and I should avoid it. And for many of us, we live our lives avoiding grief. Avoiding it, going around it, skirting around it, pretending like nothing is wrong. And I think for a lot of us, we end up becoming a slave to our pain. We become a slave to the past and we don't live forward. We don't grieve forward. And today I want to talk about it because I believe that the way towards wholeness, the way towards joy, which is the question we're all asking when we're in grief, will I feel joy again? Is it always going to feel like this? And the answer is on the other side of grief, not around it, but through grief is joy, is wholeness, and is peace. It is possible. And so I want to talk about this today because I think it's important for every single one of us. Now here's what's interesting about this conversation today. As we talk about grief, for a lot of us, I don't think we know what it is, right? Like if I was to ask you what is grief, you'd probably say things like I said this week as I was thinking about it. It's sorrow, it's sadness, it's all these feelings, and we don't really know how to articulate or describe it. So I want to talk about what is grief. I want you to be reminded today that in the middle of grief, that maybe you're not as alone as you thought you were. And I hope that on the other side of this, that you see that there's something better for you. And so I looked at all the definitions I could of grief. Okay, I looked at everything. I looked at dictionary.com. I was looking through, the Bible. I was looking through books. I was Googling stuff because that's the best way to learn. I don't know, get answers, I guess. I was YouTubing it. Anyways, there are bad answers to what grief is. And there's very little good ones. Here's the best one that I could come up with. Okay, I looked at everything I could. This is the best definition I could come up with when it comes to grief. Here's what it is. Grief is an expression of injustice. Grief's an expression of injustice. Here's what I mean. Grief is that feeling like it was never supposed to be this way. And my hope is, or not my hope, actually I don't hope this, but my belief is 99.9% of you in the room have had this feeling. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Justin. They weren't supposed to leave me. They weren't supposed to die. That dream wasn't supposed to turn out like this. And it's in this place, in this window of grief, we begin to process the why questions. Why did this happen? What was so wrong with me that you left me? Why did you reject me? What did I do? What's so wrong in my life that you couldn't be near me, Dad? What's so wrong that you left me, son? These are the feelings where we begin to experience the grief and the loss, and we begin to process, why did this happen? Why wasn't I enough? Why did that dream? Where was God in the middle of all of this? And this is the place where we feel this sense of it was never supposed to be this way. It's kind of like a road closure. It's like grief it's kind of like you have all of these roads that lead to someone or something, and every time that you go to take that path towards them, the road is closed. Right? And then you go another way and you have a thought and you have something that reminds you and you try to connect to that person, that thing again, and the road is closed, and it's frustrating, it's maddening, and you can identify with that because you've been there. Every time you open that door, it's closed. Every time you knock on that door, it's closed. Every time you go down that path, it's closed. And it's hurtful, it's maddening, it's frustrating, and it's hard to know what to do with that. This past week, my family and I had the privilege of visiting Mickey Mouse in Florida, which was fun. We don't get to do that kind of stuff that often, so we had the chance to do that. And one of the days we took a day to go to one of the parks, and we took my wife, who doesn't do a lot of rides. My boys love rides. They love roller coasters. The highest, the fastest, they're in. As long as they get to the height, they're in. And so we went to this one roller coaster called Everest, okay? And so you can kind of picture the scene. We go to Everest and we convince Mel. We say, Mel, okay, you got to come. It's going to be fun. Family, we're going to do this as a family. And so we do this ride, and it's everything that you think. It's like the gut-wrenching falls, and you stop, and the rails look like they're going to break, and you're freaking out, and then you come to a close, and all of us, myself and my two boys, were laughing, we're full of joy at the end of this ride, and then there's my poor wife. She literally lays down at the exit of this ride, and she is losing her brain, like her mind is spinning. She's nauseous. It's doing everything she can to keep those Mickey snacks inside of her. And she's lying down. She's like overheating, and I'm rubbing her back. People are walking by like, what's wrong with this woman? Like she's literally lying at the exit on the curb, okay? You can picture the scene. And I'm feeding her frozen lemonade, rubbing her back. And like you thought Disney was like happy for families. No, it's the place moms go to die. That's like, there she is. She's dying on the curb, Mel, okay, there she is. And I had this moment this week, and I was thinking, that's a lot. Actually, that's a great analogy for grief. It is. Hear this out for a second. It's like grief is like a roller coaster. It's like you start out, and that first fall is like all of the stuff inside of you is up in your throat, your guts. It's just all up in here, and you feel like, man, the world is ending. And as you begin to go through the process of grief, you have waves. And in the beginning, the waves are larger, where you have these feelings that are just so intense, and then they go away, and then they come and they go, and it begins to level out at the end. And if you go through grief in a way that's healthy and positive, at the end, there is joy to be found. But if you don't, you could find yourself out on your back on a curb being fed lemonade by your husband, right? It's a bit morbid, but it's actually a good analogy for how we process through grief. And that's exactly what it is it's a process. I think for some of us, we like to think of things as tasks, that we're so task-driven. We like to complete this task of grief and move on, and yet it's not a checkbox item. Grief is a process. And what I've learned about grief is that it can feel sometimes like something that's awful and terrible and incredibly unfair, and its only purpose is to rip away everything that was good and meaningful and powerful and beautiful and lovely in your life. And yet in actuality, grief is a process where you begin to develop a new person. You begin to develop a new normal. You begin to develop a new identity, one that is still able to be whole, Not forgetting the past, not ignoring it, not skirting around it, but actually beginning to develop a new you. And that's a lot of what grief is. It's this window where, or door, you can use whatever analogy, that you could step into and out of as many times as you need to process the distortions of this world, that this wasn't how it was meant to be. And every one of us knows that feeling. It wasn't meant to be like this. It wasn't meant to be like that with your family. It wasn't meant to be with the way that person treated you and how they took that from you and the way they broke trust with you. It wasn't meant to be like that. And this is the window in which we process, what does the future look like? So today I want to look at how do we engage the process of grief, because I think that's what it is. It's a process, it's a journey, and if you don't go through it, you're going to actually experience a lot more pain than I think God ever intended for you. So my hope for you today is that you begin to engage the process. If you're not going through grief, maybe you need to write this down. These are just ways that you can begin to prepare yourself for things that will happen in your life. Every one of us dies, okay? Just so you know, I'm just gonna help you, remind you. Every one of you will die, and so as a result, every one of us will experience the highest degree of loss, but we experience other loss as well. And so as we engage this process, I want to look at the example of what I believe is the best example of a person who came to earth and gave us the example of how to live our life, Jesus, God in flesh. And so we're going to look at this example. It's a story of Jesus who loves this man named Lazarus. And this story I've been living in all week, and I hope it really helps you as you begin to process grief. And so if you have a Bible, you can turn with me to John chapter 11. Verse 1, or you can follow on the screen as well. If you have an app, again, this is something you can live in if you're just kind of processing through your own grief this week. I encourage you to read it. But John chapter 11, verse 1 says this. It says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha." And just a little side note it adds here that this is not Jesus' mother Mary. Okay, this is another Mary. This is kind of like, you could liken it to his closest friends of family. Like they were family that were friends that were family. It was that kind of vibe. And so it says, Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. You can read about that in the next chapter, John 12. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one that you love is sick." Jump ahead to verse 17. It says, "On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother." Verse 32. "When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, it says that she fell at his feet and she said, 'Lord, if you had been there.'" How many of you have felt like that before? God, I thought you were the Savior. Where were you when I needed saving? You know, God, I thought you were love. Like, I thought you loved Lazarus, and where were you, like, when we needed you? Yeah, it's great you're saving all these other people, but we needed you. God, where are you in this? God, where are you? This is the cry. We felt this before. This is this moment. This is real. God, where were you? I needed you. And I want to look at how Jesus responds, because she says, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, it says that he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And then it says this verse, and this is, if you grew up in the church, this is the one you memorized, the shortest one, because it was the easiest, shortest one in the entire Bible. It says that Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Now, if you don't know this story, what happens next is that Jesus, spoiler alert, Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Okay, so he's going to raise him. He knows the ending of this story is that Lazarus comes back to life. And so it got me thinking, you know, why did Jesus weep? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. He could have simply just snapped his finger, Lazarus, back to life and on with the story. He knows at the end of this story that people are going to be rejoicing and celebrating and all those things, but he doesn't heal him in that moment. He just weeps. I got thinking about that because what's interesting, when you back up a little bit in this verse, it says that Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And I got looking into this passage is when it says deeply moved, it actually means in the Greek that he was angered. And he wasn't angry at people. He wasn't angry at Lazarus or the people around him or Mary or Martha. He wasn't angry at them. He was angry because, I believe, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. He's angry because he's saying, this isn't what I ever intended for you. You were never meant for the grave. You were never meant to live in death. You were never meant to experience this. And so in the injustice of it, in this expression of injustice, is Jesus saying, I'm going to sit in this with you because this is the worst. This is not what I ever meant for you. And what's interesting about it is I think for a lot of us, we want answers. Like I think if my wife was to die today, I would want to know, why did she die? Right? We all want to know that question. Why am I experiencing this suffering? Why did she die? And yet there's no answer that would really satisfy me. You could give me, well, it's for the greater good, or it's for, and none of those answers would satisfy me. In this moment, what I need is someone to just wrap their arms around me and to say, I see you. I see you in that pain. And it's not how it was ever meant to be. And yet because of the fall and broken humanity and this side of heaven that we experience, it is this way. And so I'm just going to be with you. I'm not going to give you a pat answer. I'm just going to weep with you. And this is the heartbeat of God. To simply sit in our pain with us, to actually acknowledge that this isn't how it's supposed to be. And I think that when it comes to processing grief and walking through grief, the first step is that we need to acknowledge the pain. And that sounds almost insulting for me to say that to you, because you say, Justin, what do you mean? Like, the pain is right here. I can't ignore the pain. It's so bad. Like, what, are you kidding me? Like, it's right here. And yet, I think for most of us, we skirt around it. We try to ignore it. We try to get into a rhythm and say it's okay. And we just go back to work. We go back to the gym, and we get back in the rhythms and routines and hope that it goes away. But I think in this story, we're reminded that actually there's something about acknowledging the pain, that the only healthy path in grief is through it. Because you can't heal what you can't feel. Let me just say that again. You can't heal what you can't feel. And what I've learned is that there's two tragedies that happen if we don't acknowledge the pain. The first one happened to you, and it wasn't right. It shouldn't have happened, and it was a grave injustice. It was an expression of injustice. That thing that happened to you, that loss, it shouldn't have happened. It was never meant to be that way. And yet the second tragedy for a lot of us is we give our power to our pain. We get stuck in our pain, and we fail to move forward. And as a result, there's two tragedies. Now, not only the first one, which happened to you, but the second one that you gave to yourself. You have now two deaths. Two people are in the grave. And I think in this moment, we're reminded that this story is, Jesus is saying, listen, it was never meant to be this way, but it also, listen, you were never meant to stay in this grave. Yeah, you might feel like you're in the darkness, or you're in loss, you're not whole, and things are really bad, and you may never feel joy again. You may feel like that, but you're never meant to stay in this grave. A few years ago, I had a year window where I experienced, as a young leader, we were part of a church plant, and again, as a naive young leader, I just thought, in my worldview, as you pour into people's lives and walk with them, they're going to walk with you through the rest of your life, right? They're lifers, because that's what I am. And we had people that were going through different things of their own. It actually wasn't anything to do with me, but I believed the lie that they rejected me and they walked away from me, and it really hurt me. And in the course of that, again, pastors, we're human too. It happens. And over the course of that year, I had other friends that I was walking with, and I thought I was fighting for them, and they rejected me too. And I had several of these situations over a year, so much so that I decided I'm just going to keep going. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm going to keep doing ministry and church, and I'm not going to let this affect me. And you know what happened was I didn't acknowledge my pain, and I got stuck in anger. I got stuck in it, and I didn't want to be around anybody. I reclused myself, and over that year, I put up walls. I had a great face, but I kept people at bay because I said, man, God, like if this is what it's about, helping people, and they just leave you, they just reject you, they just think the worst about you, then I don't know if I want this. And God was doing something in me. I had to learn that it wasn't about me. It wasn't about the outcomes. It was about me being who God had created me to be. That's for another time, but I had to learn in that process that there was something better for me. And so the point of this is that when we don't acknowledge the pain, there becomes two losses. The first one I can't control, but the second one, there was a part of me that began to die. I stopped being who I was made to be. I got stuck. I got stuck because I didn't acknowledge the fact that I was really angry and really upset. And I got stuck there. And so I think acknowledging it begins to take your understanding to say, where am I at? So here's what I mean by that. In the 60s, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did some great research as a psychiatrist on the stages of grief that you've come to know today. How many have heard of the 5 stages of grief? Yeah, so probably a lot of you have heard of that. So the stages of grief are great indicators to go, hey, here's where I am, and here's where maybe I got stuck. Okay, and I think for a lot of people, as I watch them process grief, I see people who go through certain stages, but then they get stuck in one, and that becomes the thing that defines them for the rest of their life. You were never made for that. So here's some of the stages, and I think they're fantastic. The first one is denial, and maybe you've heard of this one, the idea that this can't be happening to me. And this one, again, for a lot of us, we could stay here for a long time. And it's not denial in that in reality that it didn't happen. It's denial in that I'm not going to deal with it, right? It's denial that I'm going to just ignore it. I'm going to skirt around it. I'm not going to face it. And so this could be for days or it could be for months, but this is denial. Next one's bargaining, right? And maybe you've had this feeling like something happened, you had a loss, and in the beginning you say, how can we fix this? How can we, eradicate this? You want to leave, or you bargain with God. God, how can we make this go away? If I do this, can you do this? And we bargain. This is another stage. Another one is anger. Why is this happening to me? Who's the one to blame? And can I just encourage you in this one? It's okay in these windows to actually step into the window of grief and to be angry with God. He can take it. He can. He's a big God. And the truth is, he'll probably wrap his arms around you and remind you that he loves you, because that's what he does. And so, anger, this is one that we experience. Depression or sorrow, this is the one where I'm too sad to do anything. And even if you have a great faith, or if you've had faith your entire life, do you know that the pain still hurts? The faith doesn't mean that the pain doesn't hurt. It doesn't make the pain go away. It still hurts. There still is sorrow, and you have to navigate that. And then acceptance. Finally, I'm at peace with what happened. And so as you begin to acknowledge these, here's what happens is there is no rules for these. There's no, I need to go through these systematic order and then I'm done. You may come in and out of anger. You may come in and out of sorrow. You may have waves and you may have to go back there and work through that distortion and build your new reality. There's no rules, but the first step is to acknowledge it. Is there loss? Is there injustice in your life that maybe you haven't talked about? Is there loss that you've gone through, something that happened to you that shouldn't have? You had that feeling like it was never supposed to be like this? That you said, no, it's okay. It's all okay. But it's actually you've become a slave to your past. You put a wall up. You stopped living in a certain area of your life because you became a slave to it. You weren't able to accept it. So what do you need to acknowledge in your life? This is the first step. And then as we continue in the story, John 11 says this. Verse 5, it says, now, even though Jesus loved Mary and Martha, get this, he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, it says he remained where he was for 2 more days. Okay, the first time I read this really bothered me. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, if you love someone and you find out they're deathly ill, do you wait 2 days and then go see them? Right? What kind of God does that? That's a good question. And so I was processing through that, and what's interesting is, I won't spend a lot of time on this because this is for maybe a whole nother day, but as I was beginning to read in this, I was thinking how, sometimes as you get to know someone, they have things that they do that are for your good that you don't always understand. And what's interesting is in the Jewish tradition, I didn't know this, but the Jewish tradition is that your spirit actually lingers for 3 days and has the choice to enter the body again. But then after the 4th day, there's no hope anymore. And I think in this story, what God is wanting to remind us is that even in the darkest hour, even when all hope is for sure lost, that there is a hope to the hopeless, that there is joy on the other side of grief, that there is wholeness again, and even when you can't see any sign of hope, that there is a Savior who steps in who wants to show us how to get through. And this is the beautiful part. And so as it continues, I'll keep going here. It says, finally on the 3rd day, he said to his disciples, come, it's time to go to Bethany. But teacher, they said to him, do you really want to go back there? It was just a short time ago, the people of Judea were going to stone you. And then Jesus says this little piece that almost seems out of place, but it's profound. He says this, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight in every day that you can go through a day without fear of stumbling when you walk in the one who gives light to the world? But you will stumble when the light is not in you, for you'll be walking in the dark." You know, I've come to learn it's easy to get lost in the dark. It's easy to get stuck in the darkness. It's easy to stumble around and give your power to your pain. I've seen a lot of people go through grief, and they get stuck in anger. They get stuck in bitterness, and that's the thing that defines them for the rest of their days. I've seen people go through grief, and they get stuck in sorrow, and that's the thing that defines them for the rest of their days. And what I think this story is trying to remind us and to teach us is that in order for us to move through the process, you need to bring it into the light. This is the second part of grief. You got to bring it into the light. Here's what I mean by that. John 1 says this about Jesus. It says, "Life came into being because of him, for his life is light for all humanity." Now look at this. "And this living expression is the light that bursts through gloom, the light that darkness could not diminish." In light of grief as an expression of injustice, this living expression comes in and it begins to insert these pockets of light, these pockets of hope that begin to burst through that joy and sorrow, these things can coexist in grief. That you begin to see that actually as you bring it into light, there's something beautiful that happens. And I imagine that for most of you in the room, you could use some pockets of light. I imagine for maybe you watching online that maybe you find yourself stumbling in the darkness, that you could use this cloud to lift. You could use this living expression to come through and the words, like he says, to burst through gloom. I'm here to tell you today that the grave was never meant for you. You weren't made for the grave. There's something that God was doing here. He wants us to actually move through it. So maybe you say, well, yeah, that sounds great. What does that look like? Because, is it just rainbows and unicorns and daisies with a bow on top? What's the answer to this? What does it look like? And here's what I've learned that it looks like, bringing your grief into the light. It looks a lot like a posture. And for me, that's a posture of surrender, to start with God, to say, God, I just need you. I need you. I remember that first Christmas after my mom passed away, and we were in Australia, at a church called Hillsong Church, one of the bigger churches in the world, and I had this moment with God that I can't even, it's hard for me to put words to it, but it was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had with God in my grief, and I was really struggling. I was in deep sorrow. It'd been probably 8 or 9 months, and I was just sorrowful that my mom wasn't there, and that Christmas. And so we took this trip, and man, I had this moment where they sang this song. They introduced this song that day. It had never been recorded. And for whatever reason, they introduced this song about heaven. And in this song, I wrote the lyrics down real quick because I knew I'd forget them. It said, "No weeping, no hurt or pain, no suffering. You hold me now, you hold me now. No darkness, no sick or lame, no hiding. You hold me now, you hold me now." And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to lose the man card here. But my tears flowed like they've never flowed that day. And I got the sense that God met me in the middle of thousands of people halfway around the world. God met me. God wept with me. And it wasn't like I saw him. I felt his presence and his power around me. And I was without a shadow of a doubt that God was there with me in that moment. And I didn't need an answer. I just needed God to sit with me. And he met me in that moment. And it came because I simply said, God, I just need you. God, I need you. And maybe you can resonate with that because in your sorrow or your darkness, you can just say, God, I need you. And sometimes God, he meets you in that moment like he did with me in his presence, and you feel it. And sometimes you see it through people, and it's really beautiful. I remember the people that, dug my mom's grave by hand. Wow. That's beautiful. I remember the people that sat with me when I felt like it wasn't okay to be not okay, and they let me know it was okay. Those are the beautiful things. And so whatever you need to do, if that's a counselor, a friend, a group, a pastor, I want to encourage you to bring it into the light, because this is the place where you realize and you're reminded you don't have to carry this on your own. You're never meant to. You're never meant to. And God begins to burst through glimmers of hope again. Joy, peace, it's on the other side. Wholeness. And it looks different, but it's beautiful. So are you stuck in the darkness? Bring it into the light. Here's how the story ends. John 11:41 says this. It says, so they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to him, take off the grave clothes. For some of you, maybe today, you've been walking around with the grave clothes, and it's time to take them off. It's time to take them off. It says they took off the grave clothes and let him go. Because here's the truth today, is there's a way out of the grave. There's a way out. There's a way to remove the painful grave clothes that you've been walking around in. There's a way to make the pain bearable. And a lot of people don't like this, but I believe it's the 6th stage of grief. Okay, I'm going to introduce it today. And I think this is one of the most beautiful parts of grief. And it's this. The third one, it's to turn your pain into purpose. It's to turn your pain into purpose. You know, I remember, last story, I remember at the end of all of this funeral stuff that we went through, and after all of the things that I remember sitting by myself in a moment and just reflecting on the over 1,000 people that were there and the countless people that came up to us and said, you know, my mom, by the way, never stood on a platform. She just was my mom. And they told me of the letters she sent them and the phone calls that she made and the way that she cared and the things that she sent and the food she made for them. And I couldn't tell you the amount of people that said things that she did for them. And she impacted over thousands of people in that room. And I thought to myself, I can take this pain and I could channel it into my anger and sorrow and say, why did this happen to me? Or I could turn it into purpose. And I committed myself. I said, God, I want to honor her. I'm not going to honor the pain. I'm going to honor her by living my life in a way that helps others. I want to help people find God. I want to help people find faith. I want people to find hope like she did. And I began to turn that into purpose. And I think this is where it becomes really special and really meaningful. This is where the joy starts to happen, that in your pain, that you begin to be able to sit with people and be present in a way that nobody else can. And the gift for me is that I get to now sit with people who are hurting, and I don't feel uncomfortable, and I'm okay with you in your darkness. It doesn't make me upset. And I get to identify in the weakness because I've also walked through some of the weakness. It might be different, but we honor the pain or we honor the loss by being present. Otherwise, we just honor the pain. And the pain was never meant to be honored. The grave was never meant to stay in. We're meant to walk through it. And so for us, I think it looks a lot like what loss have you had? Use it for good. How beautiful is it for you to be, you know, the one who had the miscarriage to be able to say, I'm going to be the first to be there with someone who is going through this. For the one who's been through a separation or divorce to be the one who is the church and says, I'm going to be the first to be there with someone who's going through that. Or to be an immigrant who said, I'm going to be the first because I've experienced loss and losing everything and being separated from loved ones, that when there's an immigrant at our church or connected to me, I'm going to be the first one on their doorstep saying, you belong and I'm here with you and I understand what you're going through. That when you lose, when you've been through abuse or you've been through sexual abuse, that you be the first to be able to say, I'm going to walk with someone else. That this is how we begin to turn pain into purpose. And you say, I don't know how, Justin. You just be present. I don't know what to say. I can only do it. I'm not whole enough. I can't do it until I'm better. Listen, you don't get better until you start doing it. This is what makes you whole. This is the process to be present. It's the best thing you can do. You don't need to say anything. All you need to do is say, I love you. I'm with you. I see you. I see you in your pain, and I want to walk with you. And this is the process that we're invited into. And so today, I don't know where you're at. Maybe you haven't gone through a lot of grief. I want you to take notes on this because you will. Maybe for some of you, you're just starting a process. You've had some really painful things that you've had that feeling like it wasn't supposed to be like this. Can I encourage you to face it? Don't be afraid of it. To acknowledge it for what it is. To be honest. If you're not a talker, start. If you really don't want to, journal. Find a way to begin to acknowledge, today I'm angry. Today I'm sorrowful. Today I don't want to believe this. Today I'm bargaining. I don't know, whatever it is. Acknowledge it, face it, don't be afraid. There's no fear in this because greater love has cast out all fear, right? No greater love has cast out all fear, but Jesus did. So acknowledge the pain. And the second one is if you've been stumbling in the dark, I want to encourage you today to just come out of hiding. You don't need to do this by yourself. You don't need to live in the dark and stumble around. You were never made for that. Begin to bring it into the light. Begin that posture of saying, I just need some help. God, I need you. Find some friends and be able to say, I just need some help today. I need this from you. Be clear with what you need. And as you do that, I want to just encourage you that Jesus, he wraps his arms around you. He says he'll carry you. And then the last one is if you've been in the dark, I want to encourage you to begin to turn it into purpose. Begin to say, God, here's my pain, and I'm going to begin to help others. I'm going to give it away. Don't stumble. Don't get stuck in the dark. Bring it into the light. And don't stop, because you were never meant for the grave. So today I want to close with just something kind of unique for us. I want to read this psalm together, Psalm 23. It's the Lord is my shepherd. It's all about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. It's all about facing fear head on. It's all about God walking with us, bringing light into the dark and turning our pain into purpose. And I want to encourage you in this moment. We're going to stand together. In fact, why don't you stand with me right now? And as a prayer of faith, for maybe some of you today that are going through the pain and the sorrow and the loss and all of the stages of what feels like a joy that will never come again, a wholeness that will never come again, I want you to pray this psalm with me in faith, believing that God is going to carry you through. Because it's not the end for you. It's not the end. The grave is never the end for you. That God has something he wants to do. He's calling you out of it, to take the grave clothes off, to begin to walk again in joy and wholeness, to let those glimmers of joy and hope and peace to begin to come through again. So we're going to read this with all the faith that we can muster together. Psalm 23, let's read it together. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for the sake of his name. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So God, we thank you today that you are the God of comfort. And I want to pray for anyone who's here today who feels like they're stuck in grief. Maybe they haven't even been stuck yet, they've actually ignored it. God, I pray that today you would give people all across this room, people watching online, God, the confidence, God, the courage and the strength to acknowledge, God, what's happening in their heart. God, that they wouldn't be like the person who sort of just puts a protection around it and ignores it, but God, they would actually acknowledge that this is where I'm at. God, would you give us the courage to face the things that are wrong in this world? And God, I also pray for anyone who's here who's in the dark night of the soul, who feels like they're stumbling around in the dark, who feels like there's a cloud over them, who feels like there's a blanket between them and reality, and they just are trying to figure out how to move forward, and yet they feel, God, they feel like a slave to this past incident. God, I pray that today you would begin to shine your light into that situation, that they would begin to open their arms and their heart as a posture to say, God, I need you. I need others to carry this, and that you begin to see, God, pockets of light fill that situation, God, that circumstance. It wouldn't be the darkness that we've come to know, but it would become this thing that your darkness is actually, it's been overcome by your light. So God, I pray for that in every single situation. And God, for those that, God, aren't sure what to do with this, aren't sure what's the meaning, or trying to process what does the future look like, God, I pray that you would begin to provide purpose. Even right now, you begin to just plant ideas. You plant things that go, I need to actually be on the foreground. I need to be right in the front lines of helping people that, God, are going through the same things that I am. God, your promise is that you turn all things for the good of those who love you. And so we just take a moment to say, we love you. And would you take our pain and would you turn it into something that's beautiful? And so I thank you for everyone who's here today. God, I thank you that we're not alone and that you walk with us. I thank you that this path of grief is not the end. The grave isn't the end. In fact, you have something for us, a wholeness that's different and unique. You have joy for us. That peace is possible. And so we walk in that today by faith. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. So I bless you with that truth today. You're not alone. You're not alone. It's not the end for you. Take off the grave clothes and begin walking towards hope and joy and peace again. It's possible. And so I bless you with that in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. See you back here next week.